It's my pleasure today to interview my colleague and good friend, the Reverend Dr. Carmichael Crutchfield. Dr. Crutchfield is the author of The Formation of a People, Christian Education in the African American Church. And it is a book I have been waiting for years. This is the book that we have been longing for. So it is my great pleasure today to take this opportunity to talk with Dr. Crutchfield. Because Dr. Crutchfield and I are friends, I might slip and call him Carmichael. So please know I mean no disrespect. We have this treasure among us. Dr. Crutchfield is faculty at Memphis Theological Seminary. He is the Clara Scott Chair of Church and Ministry and a full professor of Christian education, spiritual formation, and youth ministry. He holds the BS and BA from the University of Tennessee, Martin. He holds an MS in management from the University of Arkansas. He has an MDiv from Memphis Theological as well as a DMin, and he and I share in common that we have PhD from Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary. Dr. Crutchfield is also a general church officer in the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, responsible for youth and young adults. And I find him to be a deep well of wisdom and insight, and it is a joy to be able to share with him today. Dr. Crutchfield, did I miss anything?
You did very well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump right in. First of all, let me say that this book is published by Janssen Press, The Formation of a People, Christian Education in the African American Church, and it is available from Janssen Press at their website, judsonpress.com. Janssen Press is all one word, and you can also get it from other, as we say, from anywhere fine books are sold. So please do get your hands on this. Dr. Crutchfield, I want to start with a question that I think probably could be its own book. The question is, what made you decide to write this book? You got lots of options for what you might offer.
Okay. Well, thank you, Denise, and thank you, first of all, for the introduction. And the reason I should be saying Dr. Janssen, but I'd say Denise because she's our excellent friends, and she'll call me Carmichael, and that's just the way it happens. But I decided to write this book for several reasons. Actually, I was approached about writing the book from Janssen Press, and that was exciting in itself because I had given some thought to it, but I really hadn't been pushed to it. But as I thought about and think about this particular project, I've been a pastor in the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, which is an African American denomination, and sort of I'm African American for a long time, and been a member of this Christian Methodist Episcopal Church all my life. And all my time as pastor, I've always been very interested in Christian education. And then a great thing happened. I was hired to be a professor, as was mentioned, at Memphis Theological Seminary, and started teaching in the area and was hired in the area of Christian education. And that teaching in Christian education led me to develop a class that I call Christian Education in the African American Church. Well, one of the things that sort of bothered me was that I had a hard time finding the resources that really appealed to me as the way I saw Christian education being. I found resources, and I used those resources, of course, and I'm thankful to the colleagues who have written those resources, and I found them very valuable, but they just weren't necessarily the way I was looking at Christian education. And so that propelled me to always be interested in it. And as was mentioned earlier, I have a doctorate of ministry from Memphis Theological Seminary. And during that time, I did my project was having to do with spiritual formation and discipleship, a model of Christian education. And so this whole idea of formation in Christian education was unfolding then. And then through work experiences, through working in the denomination, and not only being a pastor then, but also now traveling around the country and even the world, speaking to different groups, doing workshops in different groups with Christian education. I've just had a strong interest in Christian education and formation and how those two go together. And so that made me, or was motivation enough for me to write the book.
Excellent. And I teach at a historically African-American institution. I can say that you're absolutely right. There was not a lot out there in terms of offering a perspective of Christian education as formation, particularly in predominantly African-American contexts. So I personally am deeply grateful for this resource. We'll use it in classes starting in the fall because there just wasn't the right resource out there. So I'm personally very grateful for this book. I want to play on something that you talked about as you were describing your work in your DMin program. And also, I mean, the way in which this book came to be called Formation in the African-American Church, the formation of a people. Say more about what you mean by Christian life, Christian education as formation.
Okay. Yeah, I see the word, of course, Christian. I believe that people are not born Christians. People are certainly having to be formed or shaped into being Christian. And for me, being from the Wesleyan family, as well as from following Jesus, that formation has to be in the understanding of loving God and loving neighbor. And for me, and being made in the image of God, being in the image and following Jesus Christ, discipleship, and all of those things. And so when I started thinking about this book and started thinking about formation in Christian education, although this terminology was not there, I went back to my own sort of childhood and how I really became a Christian and how I became one who came following Jesus. And it was a sort of an intentional practice of people in the church to do things that went beyond what normally we think of as Christian education, church school, Sunday school, those things, those classroom settings. But it went back to things of involving young people in things that help form this mindset or this spirit or this sense within a person about what love is, what love of God is, and what love of neighbor is. And so it involves a lot of things more than the classroom. So the book sort of talks about worship and testimony and several other aspects that are part of that formation. And I think what was sort of a jumping off point for me, and I sometimes in my classes, I talk about this. I'm not sure I said anything about it in the book, but we had growing up in the CME Church, the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, have a youth group called Christian Youth Fellowship. And I vividly remember as a young person that growing out in the rural confines of Northwest Tennessee, that the leader of the group very seldom did anything what we might call educationally, sitting down with the Bible or anything like that. But what she did do is to inspire us to do things service and what she was doing in that. Later, I have come to understand it was a sense of understanding what it meant to love your neighbor, is to serve your neighbor, and not looking for pay, but just doing it because the neighbor's in need of it. And that was part of my own formation. And so I sort of saw that the Christian Youth Fellowship was a part of Christian education, organized Christian education in the church. But the way that you looked at it was a little different, and the idea of serving others. And so that was part of that formation. So that's how I come to the sense of the formation of a people.
Sure. It's almost like we are formed, like our faith is caught by being around people of faith.
Yes.
A whole lot more so than some cognitive exercise, right? Sometimes we get all focused on the cognitive side, but really it's a relationship thing.
It is definitely so. Definitely.
Absolutely.
So. Yeah. And
so let me ask, in the context of the African American church, in all of its variety and richness, how do you understand, how does that context in particular shape this work of formation and of Christian education? How does the Black church do it especially well or uniquely?
Well, I think it comes around, even though in all of our variety, and of course, certainly there's no monolithic Black church, we know that, but the idea, I think, because the African American church, all African American church has their genesis from out of the roots of an enslaved people in America. When we start talking about African American, and that root, that founding, pushes the sense of liberation, freedom, and of course is in line with the whole concept of understanding from a Christian standpoint of salvation, and that it has been the education that has taken place in the African American church, whether formal or informal, that has helped propel people from the sin and liberated people, I should say, and this liberation. So all Black churches, all African American churches can have some sense or have some historical basis to relate in that direction. And so that's why I can say that there are certain things that about the African American church where Christian education takes place that probably is different than maybe in some other places.
Right. I can certainly see that. It seems like there are some distinctives, and you raise this in the book, the idea that the connection between liberation and education and salvation, how these are all intertwined or interconnected, particularly in African American congregations. What holds this collection of qualities or traits or ideas in relationship with each other in an African American context?
I think, and I think this is why, again, in the book, doing some little history, in a sense, is that it's the historical basics that holds all of this together. And then, of course, we can't talk about education without the Bible and the biblical implications of liberation, not only implications, but actual understanding of salvation, liberation taking place throughout the Bible. And we oftentimes relate to the Exodus story, but throughout the Bible, we sort of see this sense of God's salvation taking place, where salvation is taking place, being rescued, people being rescued, where people are being liberated. Even Jesus comes on the scene, and one of the thrust is the sense of liberating people. And all of this comes and is held together or placed together through education, and all of the ways in which, even what I mentioned earlier about being youth in the church, that even though I don't ever recall really hearing words like salvation, education, liberation growing up. It may have been used, but they're not the words that ring in my head when I think of growing up. I think of more words of love and more of service and those kinds of words. But it's through those kinds of teaching and testimony that helped me to see that liberation is taking place, did take place, salvation took place, and it came because of the education. And I think the other piece of that holds together, and one of the things that holds the Black church together is an understanding that all Black churches, the major denominations, or some sense, have a connection with education. And I use my own denomination as, for instance, only 12 years after being established as a church, colleges were being established, and elementary school. And so the thrust becomes seeing that education, both Christian as well as secular education, were the strongholds in making sure that people were liberated as well as finding salvation. That salvation was more than just saying, okay, we had a religious moment.
Absolutely. I see that in my own context. The American Baptist Home Mission Societies and the foreign mission societies founded the institution at which I serve at the very heels of the period of enslavement, for the express purpose of providing education, not just religious education, for formerly enslaved Africans. And the way in which these institutions are born out of that almost requires that we pay attention to the way in which liberation and education go together.
Right.
If it's not liberative, then you gotta wonder if it's actually education, right, if it doesn't free people. I wonder, as you think about the context in which you serve and the ways in which there's a gift that you bring in a diverse context like Memphis Seminary, there's a gift that you bring that your students particularly resonate with. I wonder how you describe the uniqueness. When I take Carmichael Crutchfield for a class at Memphis, what's unique about what I come to understand about Christian education?
That's a good question. I think probably what's unique is the formation piece connected with Christian education, the spiritual formation not being something separate from Christian education, but being a part of it. And what I think the other uniqueness might be the strong emphasis on discipleship and following Jesus. And I think of all of that, what makes unique, and what I really I introduce my class often as I introduce myself, is that I think the unique thing that I bring is that I've had the great privilege, really a great privilege of serving in a variety of ways that has, and all of that has informed me to give me a diverse understanding of Christian education that goes maybe beyond what the textbook might say. And what the textbook might say. I always recall way back in the day when I did undergrad and I was an accounting major, and the accounting professor who was one of the accounting professors was an adjunct professor who would come to the school and say, this is the way the textbook says it's done, but this is the way it's done in the real world. And that's always stuck with me. And because I've had these real world experiences as a pastor, as well as a person who is now has been involved for almost 20 years in a capacity of going in and out of churches, and not only our churches, but in ecumenical settings, seeing education from a broad standpoint. It has just, I think, gives me a perspective that's, if I'm lacking other word, a rich perspective for students. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's so well put. I can totally see how. I mean, you really do know education from stem to stern in a wide variety of contexts, having both done it and consulted and now teaching. The depth of your insight, it really comes through in this book. I wonder if there are a couple of key ideas or key concepts that you want to be sure that folks who encounter your work don't miss. Sometimes we read past things. What do you want them to trip over?
Well, I think that beyond what we've talked about in formation and that connection, I think two things is that that come to mind is that Christian education, the formula that I use in the book of formation plus nurture plus leaderships equals mission. I want people not to miss that we need to be formed in the likeness of Jesus, but the formation needs then to be nurtured, and then it leads us to causing us to be leaders, and that moves us into the world, and where we are serving the world and really giving the world and being witnesses for Christ, witnesses of that love that we talk about and that we try to exhibit in the world. That's one piece, and the other piece is the piece that has been, I guess, a part of me since Garrett, critical pedagogy, and how that plays into Christian education, particularly in the African American church. That this whole sense of being able to name problems, reflect upon them, and then take action upon those problems, and not be so caught up in whether or not we get all of the cognizant thing down and memorizing the Bible from cover to cover. I mean, those things are good for those that do those things, but more important is making sure that whatever we have learned in Bible or whatever that has impacted our lives to cause us to take action, and not just to say that we know the Bible, but that the Bible really has informed the way we are and who we are and what we do and all about what we are. Yes.
Absolutely. I think, and we're talking today, of course, about the formation of a people, Christian education, the African American church. But as I read this book, I'm struck by how it's not a book just for the African American church. This is a book for the whole church. I mean, the name would suggest that it is particularly to do with an African American context, and that's important. But my goodness, this is a book for the whole church. How do you understand this book is a gift to the whole church?
Well, I think it's the gift, and I'm glad you said that, Denise, because one of the things that I would struggle with a title is that I didn't want people to think, this is because it's named African American. That's only for African Americans, not for me. I think like any in America in particular, that because we are a diverse people, that the more we learn from each other, the better we're going to be as Christians and people in the world. And so I think this is the gift to the people, no matter who they are, that sees and is interested in wanting to be better, and particularly people who are interested in Christianity or following God in any kind of way, that I think that this would resonate. And as you said, it resonates with anyone, because these are the things that are not just African American. Other people can relate to them as well, not only relating to them, but all informing and empowering people to maybe do a step higher and better than we've done in the past. And so I certainly would not want anyone to just think because it has the name African American Christian education, the African American church, that's the only people that should be taking this class. I'm hopeful at my institution that we will get to the point where people will see it that way, and that's one of the things that I'm trying to promote, and to say more to people that this is just not for African Americans.
Right. I pray for the day when we offer Christian education, it's understood to be for the whole church.
Yes.
Because my goodness, don't we have a richness to share?
Yeah.
You said it. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So let me ask, and you write this book into a particular context. We're in the midst of a pandemic, and there has been an unprecedented season of awareness, of unrest, and frankly, unrest that's caused by violence against people who are of African descent. I wonder how you understand the context into which this book is written, and are there particular ways in which what you offer in this resource, a formation of a people, can be a word for the people of God in this moment?
I think possibly, and I guess I go to the chapter on testimony when I think about this, because I use some testimonies for some people who have been enslaved, and then later in the book we talk about hope and nurturing hope, so with those two going together, that for African Americans, this is the tie, that there's always been this sense of hope, that things would get or better, if for lack of other words of using, or things would improve, and we would see how we got over, and all those kinds of expressions of seeing this hopeful, and that how we nurture this hope within people, that even though the injustices are there, and how we nurture it is not what hope is, not just sitting back. And this is where the critical pedagogy piece comes in, is really being able to name the issues that we face them, and how we reflect upon them, and then how we take action upon them, but not just taking action without reflection, and because action without reflection often leads us into places that not really productive for anyone. So I think in this season, our times are more where racism has raised its ugly head in a very pervasive way. Maybe just the time for Christian educators to be able to name what it is that we're dealing with, the injustices that we're dealing with, reflect upon them, and then take action and find the appropriate actions that might alleviate or get rid of those particular things, and believing and having the hope and nurturing a hope where ending racism is a reality, and justice will certainly roll down like a mighty stream. And that's what I think we have to nurture, that kind of hope, not kind of a hope that just throws out in the wind, but a reflective type hope.
Right, not wishful thinking.
Right,
not dreaming of it.
Right.
I love that sense, and I feel it through the book of there's the reflection we're doing is concrete. We're not just reacting to situations, but we're offering a reflective response. And that reflective response, I think, is also part of our formation.
It is.
Part of how we form disciples is in those moments when together we reflect. You're right, that's the chapter on testimony, where we're reflecting together about God's presence in our lives, the God moments, that we can identify models, how we understand what God is up to in our lives and in the world. Yes. I'm curious, and I promise I won't keep you all day with questions, although I could. I'm curious, as you think about the context of Christian education, the state of Christian education, I think particularly in the midst of the pandemic and not really knowing what comes after, how do we think about the ways in which Christians will be educated or formed moving forward? How do we think about education in the midst of a time when we're not next to one another to have the faith rub off on us, right? How do we think about what comes next for us? And is this a place for the church to think about its own intentional growth as well?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. These certainly are different times in which we live. And I think that, I guess in seeing it possibly as an opportunity to be more broad-based in our sense of Christian education, where we're not limiting ourselves to a building or a certain group of people, but that we are being expansive in our offerings and our looking at the world. And this is certainly, this pandemic probably has taught us that we have more possibilities of doing that than we probably ever thought we had in the past. I think about that since this pandemic started. I've been teaching a Bible study weekly on Wednesdays and at noon. And by far, the majority of the people that come to that Bible study are farther away than I would ever expect people to be in a Bible study. And the idea is that I think that those kinds of things can be done in ways where they're offered to people in a broader sense across all kinds of lines that we have drawn in the sand, and giving us an opportunity to reflect with one another upon the condition of our world, and to see how we might respond and take action in the midst of all of that. And so I think this is a way that what the pandemic is teaching us is that we might need to be broader and more expansive in our offering, and not be so closed in to ourselves.
Yeah, I think I resonate with what you're saying, and I think the way that you've described, it's sort of a Wesleyan understanding of the world as our parish, right?
Yes, absolutely.
and this way in which, if we just stay inside the walls and keep educating the same people,
yes.
Are we really fulfilling our call to share the good news? And it's a whole lot easier to log in to your Bible study on Wednesdays
right.
than it is to cross the threshold of a church.
Yes.
That I might not be familiar with. I really see this as a generative time, and your book pushes us in some important ways to think about how not just cognitively we are schooling people. I know that's not a passion for you, but how we are forming them. Yes. How we are equipping them, how we are liberating them from ideas that have contained them.
Absolutely.
And showing folks the possibilities of a faith that is life-giving and liberative. Yeah, thank you for all of that. Well, I want to ask one more question. And that is, if folks want to talk more with you about these ideas, I wonder, what would you recommend? How should they get in touch with you?
People can always go to Memphis Theological Seminary. That's the simplest way, and look for faculty and see Crutchfield at memphisseminary.edu. It's the simplest way to always get in touch with me. So I would recommend those interested to visit the seminary's website and look for faculty and look for Carmichael Crutchfield, and you will find me, and I'll be glad to engage people in any way that I can.
That's great. Thank you. And I want to thank you especially for this time today when we've been able to engage the ideas of this wonderful new book, The Formation of a People, Christian Education in the African American Church, with a giant asterisk that says it's not just for the African American Church.
Right.
I want to thank you, Carmichael, for what you've offered us. Folks who are interested in getting a hold of the book, again, judsonpress.com is the website. Again, you can search for Dr. Crutchfield's book there by name or by his author name. And we hope that you will take the time to engage this resource. It is a resource that has absolutely a word of God for the people of God today. And I am so grateful, Carmichael, that you've been willing to invest your scholarship, your energy and your insight and your wisdom in this wonderful resource. Thank you so much for making that possible.
And thank you, Denise, for this interview. I appreciate the conversation.
Always fun to chat with you, sir.
Yes, absolutely.